Today's episode goes right to the heart of why I created Brightly. Aging. Aging isn't something that happens one day. It's happening right now. And while we know it's inevitable, that hasn't stopped people searching for ways to slow it down. Now, the trouble is there's a lot of noise out there. Miracle cures, longevity hacks, and plenty of fear dressed up as advice. So today we're cutting through that. What does the science actually say? What's worth your time and energy, and what isn't? I'm Hannah McQueen, founder of Brightly, a service designed to help people age well and stay independent for longer. Today we're asking, can you actually slow aging? And joining me is Dr Cheryl Johnson, the lead geriatrician at Brightly. Cheryl works at the coalface with people and families dealing with real physical and cognitive decline. She knows the science, but she also sees what actually works. Cheryl, thank you for joining us. So you're a geriatrician. 12 months ago, I didn't even know that that was a thing. So can you explain what a geriatrician is?
Thanks, Hannah. You're not the only person who doesn't know what a geriatrician does. So a geriatrician or a gerontologist or someone who specialises in gerontology is a person or a doctor who looks after older people. So we have training in that, mostly hospital-related training, where we learn what the needs and how to look after older people. We also get really broad training. I look after a lot of conditions that affect older people. So it's a really broad experience that we have. I've always described myself as a jack of all trades, master of the old. So no 2 days of my work are the same. I look after patients in different settings. I see patients in the community, I see patients in hospital, I see patients in clinic, and I see patients in their home. And it's just looking at that whole holistic approach or that whole holistic care of a person, not just dealing with one organ system like a cardiologist would deal with a heart. I deal with everything. And one of the tenets of being a geriatrician is a model that we call Te Whare Tapawhā, which came from Mason Jury, Sir Mason Jury actually, I think it is. And it's got 4 pillars to it. And it's 4 pillars to the whare, to the house. And it's about the person, about their spiritual health, about their psychological health, and about their whānau or their family. And that's really what we do as geriatricians. We just take this broader view of that person in the context of where they live and who they live with and who supports them, and work out what's happening for them and try to improve where we can.
So you're a doctor that specialises in the needs of older people to prevent frailty or to slow frailty down, or what is more the clinical side of things as well?
We look at everything. We look at what we call the geriatric giants. So the geriatric giants are a few things, of which frailty is a large one. We look at things like cognition or cognitive function. We look at some of the unsexy things like continence. We look at balance and falls, and we look at things like bone health. And what we're really trying to do is assess the person as early as we can, because a lot of these things are predictable and occurring. And if we can assess them early, then we can try and put steps in place. That's what Brightly's aiming to do, is to assess people as early as we can and work out what the roadmap might look for their next few years and put in interventions where we can improve things.
So you're the specialist, the clinical specialist in older person health. Can you help me understand where the GP, your relationship with your local doctor, stops and starts, or where a geriatrician comes in, typically?
Well, we very much work with the GPs. We know we have a system where GPs are stretched. You can see that when you look at the TV and hear on the media that our health system is really stretched. GPs don't always have that time to be able to devote to the complex, multi-morbid needs of their patients. And that's where someone like me, like a geriatrician, comes in. So I have the benefit of having an hour with a patient if I'm seeing them in an outpatient or clinic setting. Whereas a GP's only got 15 minutes. You can see that I can get through a whole lot more in that time and look at the whole of the person rather than perhaps one or two problems that that person might be able to discuss with their GP.
Because you're spending more time with the patient and this is your specialty, you arguably can go deeper into an issue than a GP might be able to do, because you've got that experience that cuts across all the domains rather than a lighter touch. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Often when I'm assessing patients, whether that's in an outpatient setting or an inpatient setting, we're going to see them with their family, with their whānau, and that gives you really rich information as well. And one of the parts of being a geriatrician or training to be a geriatrician is knowing to take a history from somebody else and understanding the context that person is in and who's supporting them, who's helping them, and how that all fits together.
And with this ageing population, right, the proportion of GPs to the ageing population is not as high as what we need it to be, but I imagine the proportion of geriatricians is somewhat concerning. Do you know how many geriatricians we do have in the country, or private geriatricians, so that I could get access to one for my parents if I wanted to? Like, how easy is that?
So, yeah, we do have what we term the grey tsunami coming, so that tidal wave of older people, and that really speaks to the wonders of modern medicine and how we are supporting people to stay alive longer and also live well for longer. Like GPs, geriatricians, there's not a huge amount of us around. The majority of us work within the public health system. There are some private geriatricians, but they're not that common, and they tend to be quite busy. And the reason for that is, as another one of my sayings, is geriatrics is a team sport. So I see myself as the leader of a team. So no matter if I'm in an inpatient setting or an outpatient setting, I've got my team of people, my physiotherapist, occupational therapist, social workers, needs assessors, dietitian, psychologist, all of those together. And I can explain what some of those mean a bit later, working together for that particular person. And that's a really great thing about Brightly, and the thing that really excites me about Brightly is bringing all that team together. I'm only one member of the team. We've got everybody else there together working for the patient or for the client.
But I do like the fact that you're the team leader, right? Best you have.
We've always got to have a captain of the ship, and we're steering that ship the right way.
Yeah. When people talk about slowing aging, what does that mean to you?
It's really about the assessment of that person, working out what diseases of aging they might develop.
And so what are some examples of diseases of aging?
Frailty, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, or heart failure, cancers, dementia, mood disturbances, depression, anxiety, those sorts of things all occur in older people. And so it's really about assessing that person, understanding what they might be at risk of, and then putting a tailored intervention in place to support them. Geriatrics is really shades of grey. I see thousands of shades of grey. A lot of other specialists, particularly if they're single organ specialists, it's a lot more black and white for them. But for me, it's far more greyer because of the complexity of patients or of the people that we see. So when we assess them and we put that management plan in place, it has to be individual to that person. I can't do cookie cutter medicine. It doesn't work for older people. And that's the beauty of Brightly, is that we can put that individualised plan in for that person, supported by the MDT, determined by their assessment, and then give that person a roadmap of how to progress and how to work through that plan, and also supported by our Brightly coaches.
It's funny, when I talk to my parents, their body is changing, things are changing, and often they put it down to, well, that's just aging. So, for example, my mum doesn't seem to sleep as much as what she used to. And I'll ask her, how was your sleep? And she goes, oh, I was up at 4, or I was doing something or whatever it is. And then she talks to her friend who also says, oh, yeah, I'm up at 4 as well. And then together they kind of yap away and conclude, well, that's just the way that it is. And I'm listening to the conversation and I'm thinking, I'm not sure it does need to be that way. But do you find that some people misdiagnose change for it was never going to be preventable, this was always fait accompli, and they've actually got it wrong?
All the time.
Really? I'm onto something.
Oh, yeah. I get people who come and see me and they'll plonk themselves down in my clinic room and go, I'm just getting old, dear. And I'm like, I'm a geriatrician.
Back off, babe.
Well, let's just get in the weeds here and let's just kind of work this out. And there's this very nihilistic attitude that comes, and I think it comes through doctors. It also comes from the patients themselves, and I think it comes from family members. And I think it's just something that we're conditioned and think, oh, well, we're just getting old. And yes, there are some changes with aging. Absolutely. Every organ system gets affected by aging. But that doesn't necessarily lead us on to disease or to specific changes. So if we take sleep, for example, yeah, there are changes in sleep. Older adults actually don't need as much sleep or have as many sleep hours as younger people. Anyone with teenagers is going to know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't wake up my teenager in the morning. It's a challenge. So as we age, we do need less sleep hours, and our time in each sleep stage changes. So we've got about 4, 5 stages of sleep, and you spend various times in each of them. And older adults tend to spend less time in those really deeper restorative stages of sleep. That is part of aging. But then, if you've had less sleep, and it's normal part of your aging, you're going to wake up and feel okay. You're going to, my body feels like it's got enough sleep and I'm going to be able to face the day. But if you're waking up and I'm like, oh, I could go back to sleep and I could have another nana nap sometime throughout the day, maybe there's something going on. There are undiagnosed sleep problems. We do have a lot of obstructive sleep apnea and other sleep problems. Pain tends to impact on our sleep. And so having an assessment and really kind of delving into what's happening can help.
So sometimes that self-diagnosis confirmed by your friend that you've read about is not necessarily the right conclusion.
No. And also I think we can often be quite quick to go, here, have a pill for this. We haven't talked about medications yet, but medications play a huge role in older adults, and often as people get older, they tend to sort of accumulate more tablets. And for older adults, some sleeping tablets, can have some side effects, particularly when we think about falls and confusion and impact on their mental health or their memory. We need to be really careful about that. So it's about, again, same theme. Have an assessment, work out what's really going on for your sleep, and then try to implement something to help that.
And sleep in this example is only one of the domains that you're going to cover when you do a whole of person assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Brightly, we do what we call a comprehensive geriatric assessment, where we look at that whole person from the top of their head all the way down to their toes, and then everything that surrounds them. And it's really funny. In medicine, we're always kind of looking for evidence that what we do helps people. And actually, we do have evidence for the comprehensive geriatric assessment. So in medicine, we have these things called Cochrane reviews, which is essentially researchers taking a whole lot of research from all around the world and putting it together and analysing it. And we know that geriatricians completing comprehensive geriatric assessment actually improves quality of life, reduces mortality, reduces medications. So all in all, we do a pretty good job.
That must bring huge peace of mind to the families, but also the patient. Because you must be, I don't know if, do people start to get anxious as they get older, and are they worried about their health, or have they just accepted their health and possibly decline?
Anxiety is not really a part of normal aging. People tend to get anxiety because they might have some other underlying condition, some sort of mood disorder, depression, something like that. A lot of the older people that I meet tend to not be that anxious, and they're like, oh yeah, everything's good, quite laid back, and not that sort of anxious, panicked type symptom that I think we'll often see, particularly in younger people. As we get older, and in my experience around a lot of older people, you do have conversations around, I've lived a good life. I don't want to live forever. I've done all the things that I want to do. And for those people, we want to put life in their years, not years in their life. We want to make their quality of life good now, but we're not going to give them longevity.
What are the habits that are most dangerous to people as they age? Maybe they've just picked them up and they've continued them, but it's actually detrimental to living well.
There are a few. I think first around exercise. So we know that exercise is really good for us. We know that exercise actually helps our memory. It helps our mood. It's good for our balance. It's good for our strength. And so, it's a habit for people not to regularly exercise. And I think if you're looking for something easy to do to improve your longevity or to improve your physical condition moving into older age, it will be to exercise.
I'm not talking there, like 3K walk and 20 squats. Like, what's your definition of exercise?
Well, you need to be doing a combination of aerobic exercise. So that's your walking, and then some strength and resistance training. So that's trying to build up muscle strength. And we're also trying to improve bone strength too when we're exercising.
Mm-hmm.
So combination of walking and then some balance exercises and then some strength and resistance training. You don't have to go to a gym. I'm not really a gym person. I'm a walker. But trying to find what exercise really helps you.
Okay, so
and what you're going to stick with. So we've got exercise. The next one, I'm probably going to be accused of being the fun police, but it's alcohol.
Mm.
My spiel to all the patients that I see is when I started medical school, which was admittedly last century, we used to say that I think for a man you can have something like 16 standard drinks or something like that.
Over what time?
A week.
Yeah,
That's the no, a day. A standard drink party. No, you can have about 16 standard drinks a week or so. And over my practicing lifetime, which is about 25 years now, that has gradually come down. And I know by the end of my practicing lifetime, it will be at zero. And it's already at zero. So the Canadians have come out and said no amount of alcohol is safe. And I think we have a culture in New Zealand where, we think that alcohol it's part of our what it is to be a Kiwi. It's part of what we do, and that drinking every day is fine. And hasn't really been helped by studies about red wine and, perhaps its health benefits and things.
Which are questionable, right?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Great marketing spin.
Yeah, probably by the wine companies.
Yeah.
So we know that we shouldn't be drinking every day. We know that we should have at least a couple of alcohol-free days a week. And, I think as we age, our ability to be able to cope with the alcohol changes, and particularly when you've got cognitive changes as well. There are a plethora of non-alcoholic wines and beers, and it's really an industry that's taking off. And so I talk to my patients and say, well, why don't you try some of these? And they'll come back to me and go, yep, they're, we've found some of them, but we've found some that we really like.
Okay, so you've got us out exercising. We're not drinking
as much. You can have a little bit.
Okay,
Christmas. You can have your bubbles at Christmas.
Yeah, and your bubbles. Okay, what else do we have to do? What are the habits we should be paying attention to?
And the next one is around looking after our own health, our own bodies. And, what we're doing now and, in our 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s will have impacts as we get older. So, no matter what age you are, making sure that you're looking after your body, you're getting your cancer screenings, your age-related cancer screening, depending on if you're a man or a woman, paying attention to cardiovascular risk, know what your blood pressure is, get your cholesterol checked, check you've got diabetes. We know that cardiovascular risk actually underpins most of the dementia types that we have. Being sun smart, protecting your skin against the sun, protecting against skin cancers, melanomas, that kind of thing. Having an assessment to really look at all your entire health, and then putting in strategies to make sure that you keep yourself healthy.
And I think it's interesting. Like those things make sense, right? Get a bit more exercise, don't drink as much, look after your health, probably sleep better.
Don't smoke
or vape.
Yep. Same.
And for some people doing those things, they're like, tick, tick, yep, I can do that quite naturally. For others, myself included, like I've known for years, I'm at the stage of life where I should be building strength. Knowing about it, know I should do it, just not inclined to. And so there's a gap, right, between knowing what you should do and whether your behaviours actually are supporting that outcome. For people who aren't doing what they know they should do, what are their options? Because they need something to support behavioural change, like telling someone you need to change. Well, I've got a teenage son. I tell him all the time he needs to change, and that feels like the epitome of, and so what?
Yeah. Join the club. Change is hard. We know that. And I'm not suggesting, tomorrow that we're going to change everything. We start small, start by putting in a little bit of exercise. You don't have to do it every day. Just do something, find something that you like and just start small and then gradually increase it and gradually, vary it and do different types of exercises. It's as simple as perhaps, having a review with your GP, get your blood pressure checked and just go get some bloods and maybe just do that annually
as a starter.
And checking in with things. And if we've identified, maybe your blood pressure is a little bit high, maybe your cholesterol's high, that's just a little bit more motivation to perhaps look at your diet, maybe look at your exercise and things like that. So we are inherently motivated people. We have dopamine reward systems and things like that. And so, when we think about things like exercise, finding something that you enjoy and give yourself a reward, for doing something.
All about the reward.
That's why sticker charts and star charts work for kids, because they love it.
Yes. And it's about, I guess, once you've got the plan that has been tailored for you and what you're prepared to do and are able to do, so kind of back to that personalised approach that you said is so critical for older people health, to then have the support and accountability to try and bring about that behavioural change, right? It's stacking the accountability. If I have now joined a gym and I've done that because I have a personal trainer and I go with my friend. So I've kind of got three things trying to force me. I'm paying for it.
Yep.
I'm letting my friend down if I don't turn up, and I'm letting the personal trainer down, whom I don't know if I even like, to be honest. So I don't know if which clearly she's doing her job, but the stacking of that accountability is an easy way to create a shift in your behaviours, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there's also other aspects to that. There's a social aspect, knowing that, you're going to go and hang out with your friend, and then I suspect go and get a coffee afterwards, because that's what I would do.
Yeah.
So, you've got like that reward kind of built in there. And the thing about Brightly that I really love is the use of the health coach. And so someone who's there walking alongside that older person and just, bringing that motivation, a little bit of accountability as well, and saying, how are you getting on with the exercise? Okay, well, what's the barriers? What could we put in place to help make it easier for you? And just, keeping that motivation for that person.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess the tone of that coach is going to be really important, because feedback I've had from my parents around other things are, I'm too old to change. And so they're quite, which we would call, my teenager would call, that's a fixed mindset right there.
Oh, no.
and his papa would say, yes, and, it's, I feel as you get older, you have the right to decide for yourself, right? But if you can get the support to help you get an outcome that you want, but maybe you are too scared to try for, that's when you can unlock a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. The adage of you can't teach an old dog new tricks actually doesn't really apply here. There are things that you can do no matter how old you are. A really good example of it is that we know that no matter what age you stop smoking, you will improve your lung function. You're never quite going to get back to the lung function you had when you were in your 20s, but you're still going to have some improvement. So no matter how old you are, there's still things that we can do. There's still interventions that are going to help. There are still those little things that are going to make life better for you.
And arguably, if you can start that journey as early as possible, right? Because something that I've learned is that there can be signals of decline well before a symptom presents itself, which I found astounding. Really? Can you talk about a biomarker and what that means?
So biomarkers mean different things to different people. And in the sort of more medical model, a biomarker might be something that we measure, which might be some sort of blood test, or it might be, we have brain biomarkers for some dementias and things, which we measure in the fluid around the brain. So that's the sort of more the traditional kind of medical model of what a biomarker is. And then you have some more sort of what I would term more functional measures, which are also biomarkers. Things like one of the things we do in the Brightly assessment is how many times can you go from a sitting to standing position in a time frame. Do something called a timed up and go, which is get up, walk a distance, turn around, walk back, sit down again. And there are age-related norms for that. Things like grip strength is a really good biomarker, and there's norms for age for that, and grip strength is directly correlated with frailty. So with the Brightly assessment, we can do these biomarkers at baseline, and then we can continue to do them over time and saying, hey, you've gone from, this time was 20 seconds for your timed up and go. Now you're at 15 seconds. And whilst the 5 seconds might not seem that much, actually it is a significant improvement. So we can do the baseline assessment and then continue to monitor. And there's lots of biomarkers, the more functional physical biomarkers that we can look at.
And so where it goes the other way, where they've declined in one of these objective measures, that means you can spot it earlier. So you can celebrate success if they've improved. I love that. But it is detecting the decline before the symptom presents that's the superpower in this preventative model, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Could you give an example of something's declined? What could that mean if you were to, and what could the treatment be if you were to intervene early versus not be aware of something until a symptom presents, and what could the treatment be then?
So a couple of examples of that is, let's take grip strength. So grip strength is a marker of frailty.
I struggle to open a jam jar. Is that a thing?
or it's called a husband, or a teenage son. That can be that might be joint disease or something else. But we have these things called dynamometers, which are basically measure what your grip strength are. As I said, there's norms for age. And, if we're doing that over time, we might start to see that that's declining. And that might be your first clue that, maybe something's happening here. Maybe we're starting to get frailty or getting frail. And in that situation, you manage that with a multidisciplinary approach. So thinking about your physical fitness, thinking about your exercise, thinking about your nutrition, thinking about your medications, thinking about what other diseases are impacting and what we can do to change that. So with the Brightly assessment and the Brightly monitoring, if we're picking up those changes, then that would trigger another assessment saying, okay, what's happening here? What's changing? What do we need to do differently so that we can just gradually nudge back in the right direction again rather than kind of steering off course?
It was interesting when I did my mum's assessment, I didn't, when the clinical team did, and mum shared it with me. I don't have access to it if she didn't share it with me. She didn't have any red flags that came out from that assessment, which in itself was actually a relief. Mm-hmm. She had really talked herself into things before this particular assessment. What came out was that she needed to focus on her nutrition, her sleep, and falls. Those were her emerging risks. And she wasn't bad at any of them. I could have just said it seems appropriate. Certainly her girlfriend thinks she's completely appropriate for her age. But when that was kind of presented in a report and discussed with mum, and she then discussed it with me, I felt relief that we were actually in a position to, okay, let's get ahead of it. And I also liked it because it came from a geriatrician, not me, that the geriatrician's waiting had more waiting than her girlfriend. Whereas if isn't that a relief? If I had suggested it, and even if I challenged the girlfriends, they kind of scoff at me, like as if you'll learn, Hannah, your day will come,
Just do wait.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I loved the gravitas that a geriatrician-led assessment and recommendations, and then the multidisciplinary team coming in saying, look, these are the things we want to work on with you, but what do you want to work on? Like, this is what we think needs to happen. I just loved that they gave her agency back. And there are some things that she'd be quick to dismiss things. She'd say, well, I can't do that for this, or that doesn't work for me for this. And then she'll literally throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just loved how that was just tailored for, they met her where she was to lift her to where she could be, that she had accepted she would never get there. And in fact, she would just slowly become worse, and that was going to be okay. That was a circuit breaker moment. It was amazing. I've actually got tingles.
It's really exciting. I'm really excited to be working with Brightly in this field and in this area. I've often said that the sort of work that I do is that ambulance at the bottom of the cliff thing.
Yeah.
And
worst analogy ever, but so true.
Many bad analogies, but it kind of works. But it's, Brightly's about taking that ambulance back up on the cliff again and pulling it back and sorting it out. Yeah, or fixing the ambulance, either one, or fixing the person. I don't know. We've
analogies, yeah.
But that's a really exciting thing, and one of the things that I'm getting excited about, and it's just me as a geriatrician, is around bone health and what's happening in that field at the moment is really exciting. So we know that as we age, our bone density reduces. So we reach peak bone mass about your 20s or 30s, and then it starts to decline thereafter. And for women, once we have menopause, then it starts to decline even more. I know it's not gross, but there are things that we can do. And up until quite recently, we've always kind of focused on osteoporosis or weak bones when someone gets a fracture. And we've kind of missed that boat. If we can then assess that person developing osteoporosis before they've got a fracture, what we call primary prevention, so the thing hasn't happened yet, that means we can intervene and they might never get a fracture. So with the Brightly assessment and the one we did for your mum, we would have done a FRAX score, which is FRAX. Don't ask me what it stands for, I can't remember. But it's a score that we can calculate based on some measurements that we take during the assessment, and it gives us a 10-year risk of major fracture or a hip fracture. If an older person has a hip fracture, that is what we would term a sentinel event. So that will often be a life-changing event.
And sometimes the beginning of the end.
Correct.
Just to be grim, but...
Yep. So 40% chance of ending up in a residential care facility permanently, 50%
rest home.
Sorry. Yep. Or a private hospital, which is that higher level of care.
Yes.
Being dependent on, people for your daily activities, and a 50% chance of using a walker or a stick, but generally a walker. So that's major. If you were living in your home and then all of a sudden you have a fracture and you don't ever get to go back home again because you're not going to be able to manage. And, if we can say way back before, actually your bones are getting weak, let's get this sorted now. Keep your bone mass as it is and hopefully never get to that point. That's really exciting.
I think it is. So just to translate to Form 3 science understanding.
Sorry, I get excited about this stuff.
When I'm peaked. So our bone density, that's reducing pretty much as soon as we've been a teenager. For thinking about what it is. But
for us it's actually menopause when we because estrogen protects us up until menopause.
Yes, unless you're on HRT.
No, but that will protect us as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So any case, let's say that your bone density is dropping. Just to kind of connect, the risk of that is that you're susceptible to fracturing if you were to fall. And the risk of a fracture is that you could end up in hospital, and the risk of ending up in hospital is you might not be getting out, or you might not be going home. You might be staying there for longer or getting into a rest home. So you kind of go all the way back, which is, well, let's just not have the fall.
Yeah.
One of the things that I just find so baffling, because there's some ACC fall prevention funding. I'm like, this is amazing when I'm hearing about it. And then I find out you have to have fallen to qualify for it. Is that not...
Or fractured.
I'm not going to say it was designed by a man, but really, that is nonsensical.
Yeah. And when we talk about a fall, I think people think, like a major fall, like off a stool or off a step ladder or down some stairs or something like that. When people have osteoporosis, they might be doing something so innocuous as taking their groceries out of the boot of the car and they get a spinal fracture. I'm sorry, I'll move you to joy germ, but it might be as simple as kind of a slip off a toilet, slip off a bed. You might fracture your pelvis. So it doesn't have to be a high impact fall. These are low impact falls.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, let's get ahead of that.
It's already getting old, so we need to be ahead of that curve.
Yeah. I don't think it's pretty being the person who's getting old, but also the family observing that person declining. Okay. We hear about biological age versus chronological age. What does it actually mean?
So no two older people are the same.
Okay.
And you can have really fit 85-year-olds who basically look like they're in their mid-60s. And then you can have a 65-year-old who's frail, who's falling, who's got all those geriatric giants or diseases of aging. So it's really about what you've done up until that point to keep yourself healthy and to stave off all of those problems. So your chronological age is quite simply how many revolutions have you done around the sun, but your biological age is really made up of how is your body functioning for your age. You know, do you have any concerns around frailty? You know, have you managed your medical conditions? Have you managed your risk factors? Things like, you know, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your risk of diabetes. Have you been a smoker? Have you, been drinking alcohol? Have you gained weight and become obese and have, pressure on joints and therefore making it difficult to exercise and things? So what's been happening that's actually impacted on your body and your function to increase your biological age?
There are some tests you can do, whether they're quacky or not.
Okay, that says that you are this old.
Yeah, I saw it on the Kardashians.
Of course.
So that's what
I saw that one
my
too.
reference. But it actually came out of a researcher from Otago University.
Yeah.
Look, I was taken with it. But they say, well, you're 40 and your biological age is 35, which I thought that's fantastic. But as I researched getting older, it felt like, how can you actually give a single score when there's so many components of what makes up your biological age? But I'm not the clinician in the room. So we recognise there can be a difference between your biological age and your chronological age, so how old you are versus how old your organs are and things like that. But wrapping a complex kind of breakdown into a single number feels, well, great for me. I love that. But it could be a little bit dangerous and possibly misleading. But do you have a view on that?
Yeah, it's a little bit reductionist, I think, is the term I use. And I think you might sort of falsely be reassured and go, oh, okay, actually, maybe I'm 75, but my biological age is 70. Oh, well, pat myself on the back, I'm doing okay. But really, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And I guess it depends on what the score is actually looking at and how holistic it is. You can, you need to be looking at the whole of the person, as we talked about before. I think as we've talked about, doing that Brightly assessment and just really looking across all of those domains, we won't give you, your biological age score is this. We're going to be saying, these are the areas where we're highlighting some concerns for you, some risk areas, and this is the plan that we're going to put in. It's individualized for you, and we're going to keep monitoring you and tracking you and helping you. Just, move those levers or shift those dials, whatever your adage is, to help improve your aging.
What about genetics? I guess everyone seems to reference their risk of dementia based on some, I don't know if it's a genetic connection or not, but do genetics play a role in aging?
They do play a role in aging, yeah. And yeah, I think you're right. Most people will come and talk to me about the genetics of dementia. So, the common one will be, so-and-so in my family had dementia. Okay. And, then I'll say, well, what type was it? And trying to sort of tease that out a bit. And most people don't know. Most people don't really understand actually what dementia is and the types and all of that sort of stuff. And the other sort of difficult thing is your risk of dementia will increase with age. Your brain gets older, your risk of Alzheimer's increases with age. So it's hard to know, well, was your aunt, 95 and that's why they got dementia versus actually something genetic. As I said, there are some genetic risk, or there's some genes that are associated with dementias, but they're rarer. Generally associated with younger onset.
Right.
We don't really do genetic testing for dementias specifically. It has a lot of implications for people once we start doing genetic testing, because even if you have the gene, you may not get dementia. Has implications, so say, your mum, for example, or your dad got a genetic test and it was positive, it's got implications for you. It's got implications for your children. It's got implications for insurance, and all those sorts of things. So you've really got to be clear about why you would be assessing for the genetics there. And if you do have an underlying genetic risk factor or an underlying genetic cause for dementia or another condition, it's really about going, okay, what else can I modify? I can't pick my family, but you know what? I can change things. I can change things elsewhere. So, myself, my mother had ischemic heart disease, or had a stent in her when she was about 55. So that's a really strong risk factor for me and my sister to develop heart disease in the future. I can't change my mum, but what I can do, I can look at my blood pressure, I can exercise, I can look at my cholesterol, I can look at my diet, I can look at my diabetes risk, I don't smoke, all of those things. I can do all that to really reduce my risk. So you're just tipping the balance back the way you want it to be, or tipping the pendulum back the way you want it to be.
And say with regards to dementia, one of the things that I have actually heard you say is some of those early symptoms can be reversed, or they can be slowed or even reversed. And I remember hearing that, thinking, really? That was inconsistent with my mum's logic, or, things that we had heard. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I found that so hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key is getting an assessment. Okay, you're getting forgetful, right? Is that actually an issue? So we as geriatricians, we assess people and we say, okay, let's take a history and talk about what's actually happening. Talking about how the forgetfulness might be impacting on you and your day-to-day function. We look at assessing, we test memory, and we might do some imaging and things, and we put it all together. And often we'll say, I'll say, actually, your memory's pretty good. I'm not worried. Or actually, you might have something we call mild cognitive disorder, which is can be a precursor to dementia. Or some people just have mild cognitive disorder, and that's what they have. Or we might end up saying, no, actually, you do have dementia, and this is what we're going to do about it. And no matter what pile, what group you're in, there's things that we can do to help your memory. And, even when people are in the dementia group, there are things that we can do to help stabilise and improve their memory.
Okay, let's mix it up with some quick fire questions. So let's assume we all want to age well. What is one piece of advice you would give to someone who is 20 years old?
Get really as much education as you can, because peak education helps stave off dementia. Travel, go, to my 20-year-old self, I'd be like, go off and travel, and, don't settle down too soon. Don't smoke, watch your drinking, get some exercise. It's the same old stuff.
Okay. Has a glass of wine or beer after work every night. If I have a glass of wine or a beer after work each night, what would you be saying to me?
Have 2 or 3 alcohol-free days a week.
Okay.
Go to the supermarket, look at the vast array of non-alcoholic drinks and choose some of those.
I hate exercise.
Find something you enjoy.
Okay.
Do it.
Watching TV.
Get a treadmill and watch TV. Make it enjoyable.
Okay.
Do something small and gradually increase it. Understand the why. So why are you exercising? You're doing it to help your brain health and your physical health.
What if I sleep poorly?
I think the important thing would be to get an assessment and work and get someone to take a history of what's happening with your sleep, and working out if there is something that might be impacting on your sleep, like a medical condition such as obstructive sleep apnea, restless legs, or something like that, that we can target to help you sleep.
I have a parent with dementia.
Encourage them to get an assessment. As we talked about before, it's really important to put, a name on it, put a diagnosis on it, so that we can give that person and their family a roadmap to what the future is going to hold for them.
Okay, people spend a lot of money on supplements. MCT oil, omega-3s, B vitamins. Are any of them worth it?
The trouble with supplements is they've not really been studied the way that other medicines that we use have been studied. And, we do these big things called randomized controlled trials and placebos and all this sort of stuff. We don't really do that with supplements. So most of them don't have any evidence for them. Supplements have been investigated, particularly with memory, and most of them really don't show to have any impact on memory at all. The important thing is to understand if you've got some vitamin deficiencies. So vitamin B12 deficiency increases as we get older because of changes that happen to us. Too much alcohol might mean you're thiamine deficient. I think it's really important to address those things because that's really important for your body function and neurological functions and things. But the rest of the supplements, the evidence is pretty scant, and they can be quite expensive. So it's just, I guess, being mindful and being wise about the fact that they may not do everything they're shown to say on the bottle.
Social connection comes up a lot with aging. Why does it matter so much for the brain?
Well, we're hardwired to be social beings. That's what humans are. You meet a person and we immediately try and make a connection with that person. That's what we do. Throughout the COVID pandemic, we saw firsthand what happened to people when you isolate them.
Mm.
And the increase in mental health disorders and depression and anxiety rose significantly during the pandemic because we were all shut off from each other. Social connection is really important as we age. What often predictably happens for older people is that their friend circle decreases, quite frankly, because people die. And it is really important for older people to maintain that connection, that social connection with people, whether it's their own family, their own friends, or within their community. We know the importance of social connection when we think about blue zones. So blue zones, for the uninitiated, there's about 5 of them around the world, and they're areas where older adults actually live for very long periods of time because of the environment that they're in. And each of the blue zones have common elements to them, and one of them is social connection, that they are connected to their community and that they feel that connection.
And does that connection need to be physical? As in you're close, there's a proximity, you can touch, you can feel, you can experience that energy, or can it be digital?
I think my son would argue that him playing his games with his mates on the internet is just as good as hanging out, but it's not. That being able to spend time, see the person, when we're all on our Zooms, we're, sort of here up and, we don't really get to kind of see the whole person. And sometimes you miss some of that nuances of conversation as well. It's about being pragmatic though. If your grandchildren are in the UK and the only way that you can communicate with them is, digitally, then that's great. I've heard stories of grandparents every night reading their grandchildren stories and things, which is just really beautiful and really fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
We know that when we connect with our friends, like, I think about when I go out with my friends and, went out Saturday morning and we get a coffee and we go for a walk and you get that social connection. We solve all the world's problems while we're doing it. And, that is so much more enriching than, perhaps a text conversation that we're having through WhatsApp or something else.
Is there a difference or a distinction between social connection and loneliness? When you say social connection, is it combating loneliness as well as connecting with other people? I've just always wondered if they are separate.
I think as social beings, we talk about people being introverts and extroverts and things like that. And, some of us don't like to be around people all the time, but certainly value that time that you have with people. And I think, COVID taught us about loneliness because we were really shut off from people and you lost that connection with people. And even things like, going to the supermarket sort of felt like it was dangerous, or felt like, there was risk there. So you didn't even want to sort of wave at people, or, you didn't really want to interact even in those little ways. And with the checkout operator, those screens went up. So there was those kind of barriers to social connection. And I think that's what made people feel lonely, because we took away a lot of those things that we would just normally do. You wave to your neighbours, or you have a chat with the checkout operator at the supermarket, or you might stop and talk to somebody. But all those things kind of went, and then we felt lonely.
And one of the questions we've had from our client was a family member's got dementia, and they think they've got dementia. They're starting to pull away, and it's hard for them to connect with them. What advice would you have to someone like that? Because they wanted to know how they could, I guess, build that bridge back to that person, and if that's even appropriate to try.
Dementia is really confronting. It is one of the most difficult conditions as geriatricians that we look after, because, there's a lot of change that happens, and there's a lot of fear. I think my advice would be for that person is to try and encourage their loved one to get an assessment, and just make the diagnosis and saying, this is what is happening, and this is what we can do about that. With Brightly, we have the time that we can take with people in a non-rushed way, that we can spend that time with them and really guide alongside them, or be alongside them with the assessment. And then we have that multidisciplinary team of looking at the assessment, and then we tailor that management plan. And again, we're alongside that person, guiding them and their family to where they, to improve, or to get to where they need to be.
Okay. Looking ahead, what innovations and treatments are you most excited about in the emerging field of medicine?
I think the biggest one that I'm excited about in geriatrics is the new treatments that are coming for dementia. So everyone talks about the biological therapies that mostly sort of dominate in the oncology or the cancer kind of specialties, but geriatrics have got their own, so we got on the bandwagon as well. So there are treatments that are coming. They are available in the States and in Australia at this point, that will help dementia. We don't have them yet in New Zealand, but they are coming. It will require quite a lot of a change in what we do as geriatricians, and our assessment and how we investigate or image or do scans on people with dementia, working out whether they would be eligible for these treatments.
Okay, well, we promised that you'd give us 3 things to focus on to slow aging. What would the 3 things be?
Exercise. So aerobic exercise, strength and balance training, and some resistance training as well.
I feel that's 3 in the exercise. You've kind of got 3 parts to your one, but exercise was one.
Alcohol. So, looking at your alcohol intake and those alcohol guidelines that we talked about, and then also assessing your health conditions and getting an assessment of your risk profile, things like cardiovascular risk, getting your cancer screening sorted, and looking after your body and making sure that all your medical conditions are managed.
And if there was a 4th thing?
Brightly. Go to see Brightly. Have your assessment. Let us tailor a plan that addresses those issues. Let us walk alongside you with our Brightly coaches so that we can improve things and get you to age brightly.
Thank you for coming in. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer or a topic you'd like us to tackle, please get in touch. Our contact details are in the show notes. Let's start a movement together. Thank you for listening. Spend your time aging well. Go brightly.